Welcome back to the Friends on Horses podcast. If you're like me, a curious horse nerd, this is your spot. We've got everyone from equine geneticists to nutritionists to top level riders and even individuals who've been on epic adventures. So if you want to be inspired, learn a little bit, this is your spot. This is your pod. Enjoy the show. To everyone listening, welcome back to the Friends on Horses podcast. I should ask, too, do you prefer to be addressed as Dr. Peters?
You can call me Steve.
All right. So I'm here with Steve, and you've got a little write-up on you on the back of your book, the book of Neuro-poetry, which I've read and adored. And it brought up a couple questions for me. So I might read a little bit of this intro, and then that can be a good jump-off point. How does that feel?
Absolutely.
All right. So, Dr. Peters is a neuroscientist and board certified clinical neuropsychologist, dedicated to applying neuroscience insights to horse training and care. Now, I'll jump ahead a little bit here. So, you've worked in departments of neurorehabilitation, neurology, and neurosurgery. And one thing that I liked about kind of that picture is this broad experience on a specific topic that gives you greater insight overall to how a brain functions. So, in the work that I do, I like to look at, okay, like the whole horse, right? We like to look at how all these different areas impact behavior or movement. And with your experience, you've done I can see that in the books that you've written too. You've got this beautiful, broad perspective that's kind of cultivates curiosity and excitement that I think lends really well to communicating with your audience because you can pull from all these different areas of experience. Does that make sense? I'm going to
It
ramble a
does.
lot.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? You've had this great umbrella of experience that gives you a neat kind of viewpoint to share on horse brain science, really.
Well, yeah, it's almost hard to think back when I wasn't working with the brain.
Mhm,
Actually, I can think back to that. My story of what got me along this path
mhm,
was, well, one, some people know that I'm on the autism spectrum.
mhm,
So I'm neurodivergent. And that has its strengths and weaknesses. Some
mhm,
of those strengths are the ability to really focus and get lost in things for long periods of time. One of the negatives is easily being sensory overloaded. And so in my life, I've had to deal with that. I try not to drag too long on this story, but a lot of individuals with autism develop social mimicry because we're socially awkward. I mean, in a conversation, not only am I uncomfortable, I can see the other person's often uncomfortable with chit chat. Right. So, in fact, my wife Michelle, when she first met me, said, "Do you want to go to this cocktail party?" And I said, "Are there going to be people there? You think?" so, but my father was somebody that I could really mimic because he was a Navy pilot. And he
mhm,
just had this presence about him, and he didn't have to say much, but he just seemed to carry this presence with him, like a military bearing. So I simply copied that. I was a Navy officer for a while.
mhm. Wow.
My dad developed a glioblastoma, which is a terminal brain tumor. There's really not
Mhm,
much treatment for it, and it did eventually kill him. But I really had trouble wrapping my head around, wow, how can this one structure just decompose a person and their personality so quickly that you just think of that person as a person, but when that structure is insulted and starts to deteriorate, how that plays out. And I just got myself so fascinated with that that I said, I need to know more about this. And that led to lots and lots of schools and postdoctoral fellowships and hospital internships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that actually was what got me started. So for a long time, I've always looked at brains as a whole system. And so when you talked about the whole horse, I see the whole horse as a system, but everything that that horse does or perceives or processes has to run through the brain beforehand. So I'm always thinking of that as a system. And I love, and I can talk the same language. I love what behaviorists do when they do things to shape behaviors, but I always, from my vantage point, think what happens in the brain is long before the behaviors. The behavior is just the end result of what you see on the opposite end. But every horse is different. Every horse is going to be under a different neurochemical balance. Every horse
Mhm.
is going to have different experience. So A plus B equals C is not always the way that things are going to play out if you look at the individual brain itself. And so I had tons of experience dissecting human brains, and horse brains are remarkably similar. There are a few differences, but they're remarkably similar. So as I started to, or as I always looked at horses as having a nervous system, and that's the way I wanted to communicate with them. I would talk to people out in the horse world, and why does your horse do X, Y, and Z? And they say, well, we use this method, or you know, well, they're a right brain introverted Sagittarius. I have all the DVDs, right?
Mhm.
And so, and I came from a medical background, so I the evidence-based piece was always really important to me because you don't want to make mistakes with people. You don't want to say something that doesn't have backing. These decisions and the import of what you say to patients is huge. So you want to make sure that you're following certain protocols and that's another piece that I don't want to be critical, but found sort of that I had to search for in the horse world because there are all kinds of opinions. And when I looked to
Mhm.
see how many of them were evidence based,
Yeah.
that was far and few between. So there's one end of the spectrum that totally disregarded that the horse had a brain and almost treated
Mhm.
them robotically or mechanically. And then another end of the spectrum where the horse might have been given too much of an anthropomorphic view that got them in trouble. For example,
Mhm.
that horse did this on purpose, and that horse is trying to make a fool out of me, and that horse is being
Mhm.
disrespectful. So the nervous system is just doing what the nervous system does when you interact with it. That's the way they're designed. And for us to say, okay, you don't have this advanced frontal lobe, but nonetheless, I'm going to treat you as if you do, then the horse can get in trouble that way as well.
Mhm.
So I think over time, my mission has kind of I've tried to be a translator, and I think that's my passion. I would get just as discouraged if I went to the library and I used to pull out animal research, mammalian research, and I'd see some pretty good articles, but they are so jargon heavy, and they'd be in a journal that somebody would have to pay out $200 to get a copy. That I thought this information is not reaching people, and what good is science if it's not applicable? If you can't use it, and so
Yeah.
my drive was take good information because people are hunting for good information. And now it's even more confusing with something catch fire on the internet. And before you know it, it becomes a myth and everybody's
Mhm.
going by it and talking about it as if it's it's the accurate truth, the gospel. And oftentimes there's not a lot of support for some of the things that get said out there. So actually that leads me to another piece. this need for critical thinking. And I started wondering, how can we take science to people? How can we show people or give them the skills to look out there and say, no, there's not good support for that, or this is a small sample, or this person's just trying to sell something. I've created a podcast, and
Mhm.
it's going to be called The Skeptical Horseman.
Love that.
And I'm doing this with Jillian Kreinbring, who focus on biodynamics. We're actually going to launch this from Colorado State University this summer and start our Skeptical Horseman. And it basically is kind of a consumer reports for all the horse people, and it's designed for all the horse people to have a look at what's good science and what is maybe shady science, and how do we tell the difference?
Mhm. I love that. I had a course in school and it was about, okay, so we appreciate all this research, but how do we tell? How can we look at the research critically? And then, one paper is not everything, right? We need to look at a broad umbrella of research. And then how do we interpret that? And how does that change over time? And it's really interesting and it can be overwhelming for people, but it's worth it. And I appreciated what you said earlier, which was talking about wanting everyone to have access to this information because not everyone has the time or the resources or honestly have the language to talk about research-based horsemanship, really. So nice to give them lots of opportunities to take this information and then hopefully be able to apply it and positively impact the welfare of our horse friends, and then also the safety and enjoyment for the individual equestrian. So that's a lovely I look forward to that podcast. I will absolutely listen to it. Now, jumping back, there was something you said that I found really lovely. So when you were talking about your father, you mentioned that, you know, it's amazing what the brain can be, how the brain can be assaulted and change the bigger picture of who an individual is. Did I kind of get that right? Just
Yes, yes.
yeah. So now we're looking at things from obviously we've got the tumor end of things, and then also thinking about our horse friends, the potentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, the positive and negative experiences that they have, interactions, and how these smaller things can also shape and change the brain. Is that part of that whole system? Yeah. Can you elaborate on that for a moment?
Your brain is ever changing. It's
Mhm.
experience driven. Your brain grows by having experience out in the world and taking in information. And your brain has some chemicals to help you get off the couch, like dopamine. Hey, get up and do something. You'll be rewarded for it. But you are going to be a different person 5 years from now than who you are right now because of your experience. And that's what makes us all unique, like a snowflake, is that we've all experienced the world differently. If I say the word horse, you're thinking something different than I am. You have to because your experience has been different. If you've been bucked off and badly injured, or if you have a very romanticized view of the horse, and I'm not making a critical judgment, I'm just saying that's maybe your lens, then your experience is very unique. You've created it through your interaction with the world. Your horse is no different. And so think sometimes we get these cliches that we think are etched in stone. For example, the horse lives in the now. That's impossible. If you stop and think about it, let me put a saddle on your horse, do the back cinch up first, let the saddle roll under them, and let them buck around and come back the next day and say, okay, let's live in the now. That horse is going to be influenced, and that horse comes to you. Even if you know nothing about the horse comes to you influenced by everything that's happened to them up to that point. Where they do live in the now is you can actually start to rewire and create new pathways. in their brain. And that's the fascinating piece of all this, is in your own brain with intention, and in your horse's brain by creating safe environments, by creating learning opportunities, by giving them some agency so that they get a chance to make some choices. We're actually creating different neuronal connections in their brain, which is fascinating. So that's the part that's in the now, but you have to always be aware of, for example, brains are really, for horses especially, not so much thinking organs, they're prediction organs, and they predict based on what's happened in the past. And if they think something's going to be threatening and they need to go into a survival mode based on what's happened to them in the past, then that impacts their world. They're predicting something bad is going to happen. Here's the cool part. I'll throw in a little bit of research because it's fairly new. What we've recently learned is that there are dopamine neurons in the amygdala. This is what this means. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that's been related to and associated with reward. And the amygdala is this almond-shaped structure in the brain that's been associated with fear. Well, we've learned there are dopamine neurons in the amygdala. And if you can fire those dopamine neurons that are in the amygdala, you'll actually start to dampen fear responses. So what that means for you in a concrete, applicable way, if you can help your horse to feel calm enough to explore, if you can draw out curiosity in your horse, then you will fire dopamine neurons inside the amygdala and dampen the fear. Now, you'll never wipe away a traumatic fear memory, or that'll be very difficult. But what you can do is start to rewire so that messages that used to go directly to fear and get a fight or flight response, now some of those start to move in a different direction. Here's what happens is the horse expects, they're predicting something bad's going to happen because this feels familiar and good things didn't happen to me here before. If nothing bad happens, then they don't say process it in their brain like a thought, but actually neuronally, what happens is, wow, those amygdala neurons, that amygdala message was not as strong as I expected it to be. In the literature, that's what we call a prediction error. So a horse is predicting something bad's going to happen, but if we can create a better situation, a good situation, that prediction has an error. And the more prediction errors that we can create in a good way, the more dopamine we fire in the amygdala, and we start to really dampen that fear. And here's what I often say to people is that they say, well, my horse is problematic. They do this, and then they do this, and they do that. Well, actually, you have a big say-so in their environment. So who's creating that neurochemical cocktail? Because your horse is only responding to the drink they've been served. And if it's filled with oxytocin, which helps them bond, serotonin, which balances the emotion, if we're aware of where that process is, and where we can help them find dopamine, we're the bartender. So you can't serve 20 bad drinks to somebody and then get mad because they're drunk and abusive. You've actually been the one who's responsible for that. Here's what's so empowering. You can actually create dendrites. You can create neural connections. You can create pathways in your horse's brain that will optimally learn. That is actually, to me, so empowering. And then without even knowing it, in your interaction with the horse, there's evidence to suggest they will co-regulate with you. In other words, that's not really accurate when we say, oh, a horse can sense heartbeats 500 feet away or whatever. There's not really science to support that. But there is science to support that your breath will regulate when you're together. Your heart rate can start to get more synchronous. I mean, this isn't mysticism. We've seen this with women that go to college where their menstrual cycles start to even out. So it's not a sentimental mysticism, it's biology. And the cool thing is that it's not woo-woo having this relationship. It's two nervous systems working together.
Mm.
So we tend to think of this horse, I'm going to make this horse do such and such a thing.
Mhm.
But if you can find that synchrony, it's built into the horse. So even in the horse's movements, if you can move with your horse as a rider and you're not getting in the way and you're not balancing on your reins and you're not throwing them off, if you can get with them, that actually is comforting to their nervous system because they're born with that synchrony. Watch horses who are all running together. How many of them are on the same footfall? Watch how that little foal pretty quickly is moving right along, almost in step with mother, and they're designed that way. So if we can communicate with them, not through words, but through synchrony, through our movement, with our connection with them, we're actually moving biologically in a way that creates more serotonin. They're comfortable with that. And watch them. If they get off balance and it's your fault and they start to get confused, now they're getting sympathetically aroused. And if they start to do that and their head comes up and they start to get nervous, and then we say, hey, you bad horse, and we punish them on top of that, we're sending actually like a rocket in the wrong direction. And we did it.
Mhm.
You know, we did it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So I often when I'm speaking to clients, we talk about curiosity a lot and kind of helping we need to be curious and our horses also can benefit to build the curiosity in them because you see their confidence build and their world expands and then it becomes more of this conversation. And then this, as you said, this working with ourselves and how we are moving and breathing and not impeding our horse's movement or experience, but thinking about it more as supporting and expanding. It's exciting. So that these tools of biology can it's funny as an adult, it almost adds a little bit of when you're a little kid and horses just feel like magic. They're just these incredible endless possibility beings. And then you start growing up and you have kind of these dogmatic rules that are applied to you, this box you have to fit in. You learn that a horse is you talked earlier about A plus B equals C being maybe the wrong way to look at things. These cookie cutter methods, which stifles the creativity and curiosity. Then some of us start going, I miss this level of interest and excitement. I want to learn more and expand myself more and learn more about the horses the horse as a being. So and then maybe we get to someone like you, Steve, who who goes, here's the biology of the magic of the horse. So you're going, this is how their brain and nervous system works. So you have all of these tools. So this horse isn't just a cookie cutter creature. There's a ton of possibilities and tools to bring some of that magic back in. So there's my rambling. So it's kind of like we get to go, there's possibility and it's really exciting. And it's actually based in something that's really solid with real tools that we can give people to improve everybody's experience. So how's that rant? There we go. I rambled.
That's good. And we're going to pick up on that. The sun's making its way around.
Ah,
I'm so glad you brought that up because um, this is the truth for every horse. There are horses that are damaged and horses with psychological problems, etc. But you, you don't have to have a magic wand. You don't have to, to sit in a cave and hum for a while to get this enlightenment.
mhm,
Basically, if you start to listen for the right
mhm,
things, if you start to notice how how they they communicate. Um, and I mean more than the superficial level. They communicate through their limbic system. They're highly, highly sensory. There's this picture of clever Hans. If you've never seen this, heard this story, I encourage people to go and check that out. And the professor's giving Hans these math problems, and Hans is not solving arithmetic. But what Hans is doing is reading micro movements, reading changes in breath patterns. And whenever the professor would stop, and he wouldn't even think that he was giving off these clues, Hans would pick those up. And basically, there was a wooden board, and Hans would bang his hoof on the board and come up with the count of the math. But what we know, of course, is that Hans was not solving these mathematical problems, but sensing when the professor would have some sort of a change, and they are so attuned to change. In fact, that's what scares the heck out of horses, is that if there's something that changes in the environment and they don't know what that is, then, and they can't identify it, that's considered a predatory threat to their nervous system. So oftentimes we owe it to them to allow them to explore, to allow them to be curious, and to realize that they're incredible sensory beings that are picking up all this information. And even and if you don't believe me, when you're in a hurry and you're angry and you've had a quarrel with somebody and now you go out in the pasture to catch your horse, how is it mysteriously that you can't seem to catch your horse who just walked over to you the day before? And it's not that you're giving off this tremendous force field. I don't think clever Hans was really any different. He had the same sensory system that other horses have. If we can learn to facilitate that and get them curious and using it, it's remarkable where they can go. And here's what's even more fascinating to me, is that we're getting very close to where horses will have wearable technology, where we'll actually be able to see what's going on in their brain and in their nervous system when we do things with them. For some people, they'll say, that's fascinating, that's great, the horse will finally have a voice. For other people, they'll say, oh shit, these horses are going to tell on me now, because I've been doing this. I've been sending everything to the amygdala, right? What really encourages me is that I think we can do things more optimally. I think our performances can improve. I think our relationships can improve. And at the same time, this will certainly benefit the welfare of horses, because they won't have to put up with, you made me do it, or you scared me, or, I had to check out because I found it so horrendous. I couldn't handle it. So I just check out and I go through my life as a robot. So there are plenty of people that will give you their interpretation of what they think the horse is experiencing. I think we're getting closer and closer as time goes on that horses will have a voice of their own through our medical technology future. And even now, if you were to stop and say, Dr. Peters, I'm going to invite you over to my house. And if you were Dr. Doolittle and you could go out of my pasture, go into the stalls and talk to my horse, what would my horse tell you about me? And if I think you keep that in mind, I do, what would my horses say about me if somebody just wandered out here and could talk their language? They're fascinating. And sometimes we even shut them down when they're nothing more than exuberant. So sometimes energy. Horses can be energetic and their nervous system be calm. And there are other horses that can be frozen solid in part, and their nervous systems are a wreck. And so
That actually, oh, pardon me. Go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. That might actually be an interesting thing to jump into, because that is what we're doing as people with our horses is we are often just interpreting. We're interpreting with kind of what we talked about earlier. Our horses have a lot of things that impact how their brains perceive the world, as do we. Our learning history and experiences, and which makes us biased interpreters, right? Which is, where something like the technology you were talking about could be so spectacular. And what a neat thing to do, to be excited about this real information that can help us do better. But coming back to what you just mentioned, excuse me, the, let's say, exuberance or stillness. If we're talking about kind of practical tools, humans delineating that, if we step away from our biases, do you have any practical tools for people listening to the podcast to start looking at their horses differently and going, okay, so you're exuberant, but is this exuberance coming from a place that I should be afraid of? Because that's often where we're reacting from. Or is this coming from a place of, I don't know, calm, focused exuberance? Are you still because you're shut down and in a fear state? Or are you still because you're relaxed and you're enjoying a sunbeam? There,
Yeah. We learn best when we're challenged.
Mhm,
Then we have enough sympathetic arousal in our system. We have enough norepinephrine, or neurochemical that will cause us to be aroused. And we have to
mhm,
have that.
mhm,
So if we have that arousal, we create a different cocktail. We get a neurochemical called acetylcholine, and that
mhm,
allows us to laser focus. And when we have
mhm,
both of those things going, then if we're exposed to something good in our learning, we get a huge dopamine release. Very rewarding. Now, if we were to do something with our horse 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times,
mhm,
each time there is no prediction error. In other words, they're predicting they're going to get this much dopamine, but each time we do it again, it's less and less and less and less. And then it gets boring. And pretty soon they check out. And we've taken the dopamine out of the equation. And now they start to get agitated. They're getting bored. They start thrashing their tail. They don't feel comfortable with us. Let's do this right turn for the 45th time.
mhm,
But if we're working with their nervous system, what we can do is give them something challenging so that they're right at that edge of, okay, there's sympathetic arousal here. I'm a little uncomfortable with this. If we pushed farther, then we probably start to get into, they'd move closer to flight if we
mhm,
pushed farther. So we almost get there. How do you know if you've gone too far? Well, sometimes you actually need to go too far to know you went too far. But you're not gonna break your horse. Your horse comes back down, and if you continue to do this, there's something in literature called pendulation. You move outside of your comfort zone just a bit. You need to. That gets your attention. Wow, what is that? We're not talking about creating fear. We're not talking about scaring your horse. We're talking about challenging your horse, and then allowing your horse to then step back and allow your horse to process the information. Learning is 2 steps. One is encoding, and that's what happens when you've got your horse challenged. But what you need to put hand in hand with that is to allow them to come back down to what we call homeostasis, a range of balance. When they come back down in their nervous system, then they consolidate information. If you're just
mhm,
driving your horse, then you're putting all kinds of sensory overload there, and they're not gonna be able to really consolidate it well. So some people, old cowboys used to call it dwell time,
huh,
but actually what happens, it's reflection, for want of a better word. They're not sitting back daydreaming, I don't think, but maybe they are. But once they reset, what we do know is that the hippocampus, the structure that's associated with memory, replays what just happened.
mm,
And what we don't want to do is compete throwing more information in there when the hippocampus is trying to replay what it experienced.
Okay.
And once the horse was able to be challenged and get that big a dopamine hit, the horse wants to go back there. Why? That's where the big dopamine is. What do you got for me next? What thing can we do? And so we almost create this love of learning, this addiction for learning, because that's what it is. You're getting this huge dopamine hit from being there. And
Mhm.
what we're doing is we're working with their nervous system through pendulation, and what they tolerate, the window of what they tolerate widens because they have more and more experience. So that horse, when they're exuberant and they're actually energized,
Mhm.
the way that you know that that's just their exuberance is how quickly they can come back down because they've had practice doing that. So how quickly can they self-regulate? So they get up and they do all that and then they stop and they lick and chew and their head starts to come down below the withers and you look at them and their musculature looks relaxed. The more you can do that, that's just exuberance. Now, if I take a horse and I scare them and they get sympathetically aroused and they're not able to come back down and they're right at that verge of fight or flight, I may actually be wiring things in using the amygdala. And that horse, how do I know? They won't come back down. They'll stop there and their lips will still be tight.
Mhm.
They're not licking and chewing. Their lips will still be tight. That head's still somewhat above the withers. Those eyes are still pretty wide. Those nostrils are still flaring. And then they look like they're carved out of wood. They're not standing comfortable. They're just rigid. So all those signs tell you that that's not a horse just acting out of exuberance. That actually can be a dangerous situation to misread one versus the other. So how do we help our horses and how do we become comfortable ourselves with our horses' exuberance by giving them neural exercises and challenging them so they get more and more comfortable. And with our working with them, we get more and more comfortable. So their window of tolerance opens, and so does ours. And our world opens because if you clamp that world shut and you don't give experiences and you don't do certain things with your horse, then the world's a scary place out there. And
Mhm.
I'm never leaving the arena and I'm not riding with other horses and we're not going down that trail. And pretty soon the world's become so shrunken that
Mhm.
it's almost a disservice. We have such a rigid neuronal structure in the brain that we can't cope with anything new that comes along.
Mhm.
And what we want is the flexibility of what Martin Black would call, he wrote the book Evidence-Based Horsemanship with me, what Martin Black would call his special forces horses. He says, I have some horses that I don't necessarily know that I could really get them threatened because they're so good at finding their way back down again. It's
Mhm.
self-regulation. That's the key word.
Yeah.
You can't get your horse and say, you will relax, damn it. It
Doesn't work
it's
for me.
it's teaching their nervous system to do it alone so that they can feel comfortable, so that you can go and do things that you wanna do and not have to worry that you have to carry your horse's nervous system with you with kid gloves and make sure that, "Oh, I hope the wind doesn't blow, and I hope that, this other horse behind me doesn't creep up behind us," and, so that you're constantly in this your own bubble of fear, which if you're riding your horse, believe me, your horse is reading you like a book. Because if you're that nervous, right? I don't know
Mhm.
how many times I've seen in clinics before, "Could you give your horse your head?" I did have them on, "Just relax." I am relaxed. They look like a clothespin on their horse, and you just know there's actually tons of really interesting studies. Even some are a bit humorous on the impact of just go look it up. Look up the impact of nervous humans on their horses. You'll see they'll be so subtle, but the horse will pick it up clear as day.
Mm.
And I that's what I would like people to do is start to think of the interactions as two nervous systems
Mm.
communicating in a nervous system language and realizing that, wow, what I carry into that pasture, what I carry into that connection with that horse is my nervous system. But if I'm pissed off today, or if I'm nervous, or I'm actually afraid, maybe I need to step back and the horse and I work with my fear versus focusing it all on the horse. Maybe, and actually that's pretty much what equine therapies are about,
Hmm.
right? So you, you don't have to give it a title, but maybe just taking your horse for a walk on the lead line to settle your nervous system and learn to communicate that way will be enlightening. And I hope so, because that's not the woo-woo, that's the neurobiology.
Right. This is some strong science. And this brings us into what we talked about earlier or before the podcast started, which is how do we get the nervous system, how do we work with the nervous system instead of working against it? So using it as a tool like this, understanding it and using tools to help our horses self-regulate. And it sounds like we're actually quite a piece of that too. We are one of these environmental factors that impacts our equine nervous system regulation and self-regulation. And that's a strong tool because if we can kind of tap into us and if we have tools to manage us, that takes one layer out of from the horse behavior consultant standpoint, from the trigger stacking, really, you
Yes.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if your horse is a prediction organ,
Yeah.
and they're prey animals, so they are constantly asking you whether you know it or not, "Am I safe?"
Mhm.
That's the most important question you can answer. So,
Mhm.
sometimes when that horse puts its head down before it gets onto the trailer, maybe because it wants to use its binocular vision, because when it puts its head
Mhm.
down,
Mhm.
it has depth perception, but we say, "No, get your head up here, get on," and they bang their hoof on, and
Mhm.
then now we've put something in there that says, they've asked us, "I'm putting my head down. I want to check this out. I
Mhm.
need to answer this question. Am I safe?" And we say, "We're not answering it." And bang, now we've proved to you it's not safe.
Right.
If we can create predictions for our horse that say, "Oh, they're not going to think this through in the same way. Oh, here's a trailer. I've seen a trailer 20 times. I know that this is safe. I've already checked it out. I can identify it. I have no problem just walking in. And I know my owner will give me a moment where I just hesitate and I just want to make sure this step up trailer is actually a little more challenging than just the ramp."
Mhm.
And if we can be attuned to those little things and answer, "Am I safe?" then what we facilitate is curiosity on the other side. I'm safe enough to explore. Really, that's what you would like to do. Instead of being so task driven, to create neuro exercises where your horse begins to say, "I'm safe enough to explore." Then you should see the horse that'll show up for you and the confidence they'll have in their learning. And you'll create a cocktail that has plenty of oxytocin. They feel safe. They feel bonded. Has plenty of serotonin. They'll feel emotionally balanced. Has
Mhm.
plenty of dopamine because now I explored and I found out something new and I checked something out. Just like we do. Their brains are not that different in that way. And when you've been curious and you've looked to find new information, and it's caused more and more neural connections in your brain.
Mhm.
Yes, that feels so good.
Mhm.
That's not any different. And go be a scientist. In fact, I tell people, don't believe me, just go ask your horse.
Mhm.
Just go out there and what do you have to lose? Just try from a different lens. And I know a lot of people who have told me, I actually don't do anything all that different with my horse. I just see my horse differently now. And that makes all the difference in the world in the way we work together.
It sure does. It sure does. I love that curiosity lens, as I said before. If we're curious and that leaves space for our horses to be themselves and curious, then the possibility for learning and growth is just so great. So I have a curious question for you. And I'm wondering, so you're talking about equine self-regulation earlier. And I would love to know what that looks like in the brain. If you're okay to, I know we don't have a ton of time left. If you're okay to talk a little bit about that. And then you also spoke to some exercises to cultivate that curious, eager, confident learner. And maybe again, if we've got the time for it, just touching, I think on those two pieces might be valuable for people. How does that feel?
Yeah, yeah. Without getting staying in a way that we can make this a little more understandable, but what you're doing with your horse actually even creates changes on a cellular level.
Mhm.
So, if, for example, we had sympathetic arousal, that on day 1, something happened that your horse was hyper alert and just couldn't seem to calm down. So their body was flooded with norepinephrine. But what we did, we went out of our way to answer questions, "Am I safe?" And the horse realizes, their
Mhm.
brain realizes, nothing bad happened to me.
Mhm.
So then we go back and we work with that. So here's another challenging situation. I'm going to keep my eye on you, and I can see that how well you're able to tolerate that. Let's sort of
Mhm.
back off. I'll take off all the pressure,
Mhm.
and let's see if you can find this. And if your horse suddenly starts to blink and their head starts to come down, what you're doing, and this won't happen overnight, what you're doing is actually allowing them to tolerate more in their world. And there's a point with some horses that if you put on too much pressure, they tune out the world. You absolutely don't want to do that. What you want to do is have your horse aware of everything, but just not feeling they have to respond defensively. And so that's what we're going to teach them. We're going to answer that question. Am I safe? We're going to give you time. Maybe you've learned something and it's been challenging and we've spent 15 minutes at it. And you decided, well, there's 2 hours worth of stuff I wanted to do with my horse. Maybe at that point in time, we say, but their nervous system was really challenged. This might be a time to just let them go out in the pasture and be a horse. Because what happens there is they're going to process this information without a lot of outside interference. So if we're aware of doing that with our horses, what you'll start to do is you'll down regulate neurotransmitters. Here's what I mean by that. Let's say the first day our horse got really nervous about something. So he had a lot of norepinephrine and it was fitting into norepinephrine receptors. So this chemical comes across the synapse and fits into a receptor and it fires. So it's having an influence. But then we come back the next day and we do the same and we make it a little challenging and we come back down. After a while, a lot of those receptors will fall off. So now,
Mm.
even if we have norepinephrine in our system, only a limited amount will find home in a receptor. So that horse can only get a certain level of arousal. It it becomes harder and harder if we've made them feel safe for that influence to carry onward. So the neurons themselves are the cells themselves are making corrections. And think of it just the opposite. Your horse gets scared, and then we do something even scarier to our horse, and
Mhm.
we do that day after day. What happens is they fill up with receptors, and now we're upregulating so that even the smallest amount of norepinephrine, even if we're in a safe environment, still creates this high anxiety, still
Mhm.
creates this hyper alertness because we've created it even on a cellular level. So when, I think that your horse can do anything if we provide the right environment. I mean, egotistically, we think we're teaching them all these things. But if you go out and you look at a group of Mustangs, they're not just standing still saying, I hope a human comes and teaches me to canter and teaches me to the trot. They know how to do all those things already. What we do want to do is work with their nervous system so that we can have a relationship and direct those things and even give them some say so in that so that we create, you know, if you've always turned left on a trail and it seems like your horse wants to go to the right, go to the right. That's a prediction error for one. It's brand new information. They're more alert because we're going down a different route. We've given them what's called an internal locus of control. An external locus of control taken to the extreme is you're made to do every single thing that I ask you to do, and there's no escape and you have no say
Yeah.
so. What we're learning is that that impacts the welfare of the horse. And I think
Mhm.
you'll see something called the 5 domains that a lot of scientists are now using as a model. And one of those domains is the mental domain. And one of the things we find lowers cortisol levels, reduces the risk for developing stereotypies like cribbing, is giving a horse an internal locus of control, setting things up so your horse might have the opportunity to solve a problem. If you come to a stream crossing and say, "My horse never crossed water before," and your friends say, "Well, come on, get across," and you spur that horse and they jump like a bullfrog over the water, you can't mark down water crossing under your training, really.
Yeah.
But if you let them solve a problem, if they want to turn away and you just back off where they feel nervous and where they where you notice that they're starting to downregulate and turn back around and slowly at their own pace work with their nervous system, and then they splash in the water and they put their head down because they want to get depth perception, and we try to facilitate this curious learning environment that's right in front of our eyes, that if we wanted to go out and do a task, it really wouldn't even benefit as the brain as much as this allowing your horse through this situation. And then they come back and pretty soon they're standing in the water. And believe me, that will generalize out to other learning. Your horse will know that you give them time and they're not, it's almost the difference with a human. If you could walk to the edge of the diving board, you've never been off before, and you sit on the edge and you dangle your feet and you jump in, and then eventually you get enough courage, you dive. But what
Mhm.
happens when big kids are behind you and you've never been off and they're pushing you? There's all this anxiety. It's a horrible experience. And yeah, you may get a dive in, but those two nervous systems are going to be totally different. And if we can create a kinder approach and be aware of our horse's nervous system, then what can happen is that we'll still get what we wanted. And performance-wise, a relaxed horse is going to be a much better performer than a horse that's tense, tight, and sympathetically aroused. So, in terms of all for all of our benefit, the horse and the rider, it behooves us to understand their neurological makeup.
It really does, and I will just quickly give one example in case anyone's kind of wondering where some of this can go. So my you talked about horses with stereotypies. So like cribbing, weaving, there's a list. I have one here. She's a cribber. She's an off the track thoroughbred, classic. But speaking of kind of reading your horse and taking in information, when I started putting saddles on her, I had her out at Liberty and I'd bring the saddle up and then she would go and crib. And that was information for me. But it also turned into her kind of her no cue. Now, as I respected the no, and we worked with some other curious based, let's say, learning exercises, she still slowly would start saying yes to the saddle. And then she started follow, and now she'll follow the saddle around at Liberty. So it's just this, instead of, as you said earlier, this boxing in, this closing space, no, the saddle has to go on, we have to do the thing, creating fear instead of listening and looking and being curious about her process and having that in turn change behavior. And now I don't have a horse who tolerates the saddle. I have a horse that goes most of the time, "Hey, look, cool, saddle. We get to do saddle things today." And it's just so much more fun as a partnership. to feel like we have the enthusiasm instead of the, no, you have to do this. So,
Oh, and lastly, I just want to talk about I'm always trying to translate scientific information into ways that people could feel it and understand it.
mhm, yes.
And for myself, I had always written poetry about the nervous system. And I shared that not all that long ago with someone, and they said, I didn't understand the science, but this gives me a felt sense of what's going on in my horse and what's going on in me. You could say learned helplessness, and I could go read it in a textbook, but
Mhm.
reading it about what's going on inside a horse who's standing all alone, that looks really calm, but has been through this process of learned helplessness. So I, my publisher said, let's see some of those poems. And he goes, no, we have to publish these. So I put a little side book out, Neuro-poetry, and basically it's a poem. And then I describe clinically in a little sidebar underneath a clinical synopsis of what's going on in the nervous system. And I've been so pleased that a lot of people have said, wow, one thing, it actually touched me. But secondly, I kind of felt what was going on in the nervous system. And for me, that was really rewarding. Yeah.
Mhm. And I'll say to people too, so I've read Steve's The Book of Neuro-poetry, and it is excellent. I feel like when I'm reading it, I'm relaxing. And also, it stimulates a little bit of magic. Again, that thing we're looking for as horse people. Absolutely go out and get that. And then we have the newer book, Horse Brain Science, The Neuroscience of Ethical Horsemanship. And it has that same feel. I'm not through the whole thing yet, but it's easy to understand and hopeful, which is nice because I feel like a lot of the time we go and we are learning about science and we're maybe just affronted with the things that we haven't done well and the things that are hard to look at. Whereas I feel like this book brings up the obviously the neuroscience of ethical horsemanship, but in a way that gives you tools and understanding, and it's more expansive. Instead of shutting us down, it gives you the opportunity to grow and feels really positive. So I really appreciate that. So go buy it. That's what I'm saying.
Emma, I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm hopeful that the listeners can actually take some of this and go ask your horse. You
Mhm.
you are all scientists. It shouldn't be in an ivory tower. Science shouldn't be in a dusty library. So go out and try things and experiment and do things with your horse and grow your dendrites in you and your horse. It's a brave new world out there. And here's the thing. Your brain is going to wire and rewire, and so is your horse's anyway. So why not have some intention to wire it in the best way possible for you both?
I love it. Okay, well, I think on that delightful note, I'll say that's a wrap. Okay, Steve.
Okay, Emma, thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. My goal is to share information with people that they may not have had access to. So please share this podcast around. Do all the things rate, review, subscribe, donate. Let's keep this podcast going. And most important, go have fun with your horse. See you soon.